Like a lot of kids of my generation, I grew up in arcades. In the 80s, me and my friends spent our weekends and our afternoons slipping quarters in the slots to play Punch-Out!, 1942, Galaga, and Karate Champ. My go-to arcade was called SilverBall in Parole Plaza, outside of Annapolis. It's long gone now, but back then it was incredible. You put a dollar bill in a change machine and out came fluorescent orange-painted quarters. They looked like coins from outer space. For a couple of years, I washed as many dishes and shucked as many oysters as I could to earn money to spend at the arcade. I got to know everyone there. One of my favorites was called Snacks and Jackson, a weird game made by one of the many long-defunct arcade game companies. In Snacks and Jackson, you control the head of a bedridden clown and try to feed it peanuts, all while making sure to keep the clown's nose bouncing off the walls. You had a sneeze button and got a free nose for every 20,000 points. None of that makes sense, I know, but back then it could fill an entire afternoon, if I had the quarters. Flash forward to July this year. I was at Comic-Con in San Diego where I gave a brief talk about writing for the screen. I had a lot of extra time one night, plus a generous per diem, so I headed to the Retro Arcade Games Room. It was off in a neglected corner of the convention center, but there were still a few overgrown children like me in there reliving their youth. I had to admit the nostalgia I felt in that room was tastier than a Hostess cupcake. I played some Spy Hunter, race cars in pole position, and caught fire with Reggie Miller and Detlef Shrimp and NBA Jam. Much to my surprise, they even had a Snacks and Jackson. But when I walked over there to play, there was, inexplicably, already someone at the controls. I nearly gasped in surprise. I thought nobody on this earth liked that game except me. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say I hit it off with that person and we spoke deep into the night over a few hundred games of Paperboy. And before they left me, the con, the country, and the name of their birth certificate forever, they told me a story about Polybius. Polybius was one of those legends every arcade kid knew about way back when I was growing up. The stories were never consistent, though. One kid said it was a trivia game. Another said it was a shooter. Word got around that Polybius was so addictive that the company that made it was forced to stop production. But a few stray cabinets found their way into the world on the black market. We'd sometimes ask the owner of SilverBall if he could get a hold of Polybius. He'd pull us aside and tell us about how he knew a guy, who knew a guy, who bribed a guy, who could get him one. That the game was just weeks away from being delivered. But I think he was just messing with us. And it never showed. But that person I met playing Snacks and Jackson at Comic-Con this summer, they told me a story about Polybius. One they swore was true. And it was the craziest tale I've ever heard. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 44, Polybius, Part 1. Vinny watched the light reflect off the glossy eyes of his best friend Jenna. She didn't blink as she navigated the red brick walls of the arcade game Tank Battalion. With a bulb 4-way joystick, she controlled a yellow tank, aiming its gun at blue enemy tanks, all of which were trying to take her out first. Almost as much as she loved playing them, Vinny loved to watch Jenna go to work on the games. She had unrivaled concentration. She could stand at an arcade cabinet for hours without losing steam, guide Miss Pac-Man through endless mazes, maneuver frogs through traffic again and again, and she could do all that without food or water, without saying a word even to her best friends. She and Vinny had grown up side by side an hour outside of Portland, here in Barnaby, the smallest pretty big town in the state of Oregon. Vinny walked past a couple skee-ball games to find Jim, who was steering a Formula One car to victory in pole position, an exciting new racing game released just weeks ago in the spring of 1982. Jim was the third of their trio. He didn't have half the talent or stamina of Jenna, but he was still a hell of a gamer, especially for a guy who looked half blind with his thick soda bottle glasses. He scored over 100,000 points in Defender twice. Vinny never even reached 50,000. Jim was also a kick-ass pinball player. When Jim's game ended, he stepped out and stretched. Both of them were out of quarters, so they went to watch Jenna, who was still dominating Tank Battalion. She resembled a robot programmed to play arcade games. She moved the joystick like it was a part of her right hand. Her left middle finger hit the fire button exactly when aligned with an enemy tank. Her efficiency was legendary. She was so good she could play any game at the arcade nearly to its end on a single quarter, which was good because her parents didn't give her any money. She basically depended on the quarters she found behind the coin return flaps. She was like a hound dog. Nobody was better at sniffing out forgotten coins. But even legends eventually die, and Vinny and Jim watched as Jenna was taken out on round 19 after being cornered by 3 enemy tanks. Jenna's eyelids slowly slid down to normal height. Her shoulders relaxed. She became aware of her surroundings. "Let's go out back, nerds," she said, and walked away. Jim and Vinny looked at each other and followed. DeCarlo's den was, to put it nicely, a crap hole, but it was still Vinny's favorite place in the world. It was in the corner of a little strip mall next to a dry cleaner. It used to be a little grocery, but then DeCarlo put a Space Invaders in the back. Kids lined up to play, so he took out the X-rated magazine rack and put in a second arcade game. He quickly realized he was making more money from the games than from selling white bread, so he tossed all the food racks and changed the sign from DeCarlo's Grocery to DeCarlo's Den. He added a couple dozen more games and watched the quarters flow in. Vinny and Jim passed the counter where DeCarlo kept candy and sticks of gum. DeCarlo himself was all right. A 30-something guy, but might as well be 100 years old as far as Vinny and his 11-year-old friends were concerned. DeCarlo chain-smoked, rarely shaved, and smelled a bit like those purple pucks they put in urinals. But he was cool to the kids and always refunded them if a quarter got stuck. Jenna already had her cigarette lit when they got outside to the rotted back porch overlooking the trash bins. She might have only been 11 years old, but she easily looked 13 with a Marlboro hanging off her sunburned lips. "What'd you geeks play today?" Jenna asked. Vin could only find a few quarters in the old peanut tin on top of the fridge where his parents kept spare change. He stuck to Frogger and the kinda lame Star Castle, but his games petered out quickly. Jim also had only played $1 worth. Money was tight in all their families, but like Vinny, he did odd jobs around town to scrounge up cash for the arcade. They were there every day after school, the gruesome threesome they called themselves. Even if they didn't have quarters, they'd just watch other people play or talk games with DeCarlo. Sometimes Jenna would give tips to newbies, teach them how to get to higher levels, in exchange for cigarettes and free plays. But the undeniable fact was that the 3 of them had played every game at DeCarlo's 100 times, and they were getting a little bored. DeCarlo hadn't changed out the games in months, and they didn't hold back their complaints. But that day, Vinny had an idea to extinguish that boredom. He'd heard about a game that none of them had ever played, that none of them had even heard of. He didn't know if it actually existed. After all, the story came from an old, sad, pathetic drunk. His mom. She was ripping drunk and looking for a fight that night. She'd come home from the bar to see Vinny on the floor watching the Incredible Hulk live-action series. She said all the shows Vin watched were horse poo, just like those arcade games he played. Vinny usually kept his mouth shut when his mom was delivering a drunk monologue, but when she went off about arcade games, the best thing in his life, he couldn't hold his tongue. "How do you know?" he asked. "Have you ever even played one?" She was putting together another vodka and stopped mid-pour. "Yeah, I played them," she said, slurring her words. "There was one of those stupid things at Otto's before it closed. In the back by the cigarette machine. I wasted a quarter on it. Didn't make any sense. He asked what game it was, but all she could remember was Polybius or something. She said everyone at the bar stopped playing it a long time ago, so it was collecting dust when Otto shuddered. The game was giving them nightmares. One of the guys said he couldn't stop thinking about it, that he saw the game throughout the day. Vinny's mom said one of the regulars had had a seizure while playing. She saw it herself. He went to the floor flailing around like he'd been struck by lightning, foam pouring out of his mouth and everything. And one day, she claimed, creepy-looking men in black suits showed up and jiggered around with the machine. What she was saying didn't make any sense, Vinny thought, but she rarely made sense after a night of boozing. Vinny mentioned this story to DiCarlo at the arcade the next day, and the man looked spooked. Polybius, you mean? If so, I'd stay away. That's not a game you want to play. He refused to elaborate. Vinny repeated all this to Jenna and Jim as they pedaled their bikes through downtown, past the police station and the post office, past the bakery and the diner, past the sandwich shop and the car wash. 2 Topps baseball cards flickered on Vinny's spokes as they left downtown for the Barnaby side streets. After a few minutes, the houses thinned out, replaced by mid-sized factories and plants. Broad single-story structures with nebulous names like the Helios Corporation and Paper Inc. This was the part of Barnaby that kids never came to. Eventually, they stopped by an old white house that had once been a converted bar. The hand-painted Otto sign still stood by the street at a 45-degree angle. The sun was close to setting and the clouds were predictably rolling in. The bar looked like it hadn't been open in a year. Vinny's mom had said something about Otto having a heart attack. A couple of windows were boarded. There were a few rusted beer signs by the front door. Not very inviting, Jim said. They looked at Jenna. No way in hell she was going to pass up the chance to play a new game. Let's find a way in, she said. After circling the place a couple times and Jim nearly stepping on a rattlesnake hiding in shadow by the back, they found a way into what was once Otto's bar, through an unlocked hopper window into the basement. Jenna took the lead, of course, wiggling herself through feet first. Vinny followed, landing less than gracefully on his butt on the cement floor. By the time Jim got in, Vinny's eyes were adjusted to the dark room. It seems that when Otto had his heart attack, nobody came back to claim the bar. The basement had a few shelves holding dusty bottles of beer. A few untapped kegs were in the corner covered in cobwebs. Vinny was thinking that his mom would kill to be in this room. But then Jenna tugged at his shirt and pulled him towards the creaky wooden stairs. Let's see if it's here, she said. Her mind was focused on the game. Jim grabbed an ancient Budweiser bottle and shoved it into his pocket. Then they went upstairs after Jenna. The ground floor was only slightly less dark than the basement, with the last bits of twilight barely sneaking in. The place where Otto used to serve drinks was no more than a derelict wooden counter. They walked around it and stepped over a couple of toppled stools. In the back corner of the room was the cigarette machine, and right next to it, an arcade game. The screen and control panel were grimy. Vinny could see a hint of green poking through on the marquee. Jenna wiped the label clean with her sleeve. Now they could see the name of the game in a bubbly light green font. Polybius. Traditional bed sheets can harbor more bacteria than a toilet seat. It can lead to acne, allergies, and stuffy noses. It's nasty as hell. Miracle Made offers a whole line of self-cleaning antibacterial bedding such as sheets, pillowcases, and comforters that prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth and require up to 3 times less laundry. No more gross odors. That's what they need all over America. They actually need a little Miracle Made everywhere, because I feel comfortable with Miracle Made, and I think you will too. Go to trymiracle.com/run to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo RUN at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/run and use the code RUN to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/run to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. Vinny said it out loud. Polybius. The word sounded familiar, maybe something he learned in school. He reminded them that DiCarlo warned him about playing this game. Turn it on, Jenna said. Jim fit the plug into the socket, and Jenna hit the power button on the back. Vinny heard a whir and a few bleep bloops as the machine powered on. The three of them stood side by side as they saw the screen go from black to filled with indiscernible flashing codes. And then all that code coalesced into a single word in white font. Sinisloskin. None of them knew what it meant. Jim thought it looked German. They agreed it must be the name of the game manufacturer, like a German Atari. They'd all heard rumors about how East Germans behind the Berlin Wall couldn't get access to Western media because of the Cold War. No Pac-Man for them, so they made their own bootleg arcade games. Could Polybius be one of them? The home screen came on. Under the title it said, Insert quarters for player 1 and companion. Maximum of 2 players. Quarters, shoot. They'd all run out at DiCarlo's. The two boys looked at Jenna, the coin hound. She squatted down and closed her eyes, meditating, willing a quarter to appear. She stuck 2 fingers into each of the coin return flaps. Vinny had no doubt about what would happen next. Jenna held up 3 quarters. Distant thunder cracked as they stared at the 3 quarters in Jenna's hands. Only 2 could play at a time, so one of them would have to sit out. Obviously, Jenna would play. She was the best of them at nearly every game, the most skilled, the most patient, and the most perseverant. All she needed was a quarter and a slot to drop it in. She handed each of the guys a quarter, but who would be player 2? Jim was better at racing games, pinball, and space shooters. Vinny had more success at maze games like Pac-Man and Wizard of War, and was killer at platformers like Donkey Kong. The truth was that something felt wrong about this game to Vinny. Yes, part of it was that they were in an abandoned bar in the middle of the night as a storm built up outside. But there was something else bothering Vinny, something he was afraid of and afraid to say out loud. The very presence of the Polybius game scared him. He looked at Jim, who was clearly even more scared than Vinny. Whatever Vinny was sensing, Jim was feeling it twice as hard. Still, Vinny didn't want to play Polybius, even if he didn't know why. You play, he said to Jim. There was nothing Jim could do. Jenna had the opposite look of either of the boys. She was raring to go, and Jim would look chicken if he didn't join. Jim put his quarter in the machine, and Jenna hit start. Right away, Vinny could tell this game was different. The first screen was just a list of instructions, and they were pretty weird. Polybius must feed. Knowledge is his food. You are the knowledge. The instructions faded and the first level appeared. It was a maze, kind of like Pac-Man. There were 2 characters in the middle. Jenna's was a white dolphin. Jim's was a green owl. There were a dozen blue sapphires scattered throughout the maze that they needed to collect. Before they could move, something appeared at the top of the screen. A floating bearded head. This was their adversary, Polybius. Only 1 quarter each, Vinny said. Don't waste them. Vinny put his quarter in his pocket and stood between them to watch over their shoulders. Jenna and Jim split up, navigating different parts of the maze while evading Polybius. Within 20 seconds, Jenna had collected 8 of the sapphires, and Jim had taken 3. Polybius was always lurking, but slow. Jenna quickly took the last sapphire. Level 1, fulfilled. That was easy, Jim said. Jenna kept her eyes fixed on the screen. Level 2 was more of the same, except a slightly more complicated maze, and Polybius was faster this round. Jim concentrated on staying away from Polybius while Jenna took the sapphires. A minute later, she'd gotten them all. Level 2, fulfilled. Jim cracked his fingers and smiled at Vinny. Vinny started to wonder why he was scared of the game in the first place. They beat 3 more levels fairly handily, with only one close call when Polybius nearly got Jim. Level 3, fulfilled. Level 4, fulfilled. Level 5, fulfilled. Vinny noticed that the room was now pitch black other than the glow of the game. The sun was fully set outside and the wind from the storm was finding its way into the old bar. After a few more levels, Vinny wondered if the game was simply too easy for players of their, mostly Jenna's, caliber. As long as Jim avoided Polybius, Jenna could keep picking up sapphires and push them to the next level. Level 6, fulfilled. Level 7, fulfilled. Level 8, fulfilled. Level 9, fulfilled. Level 10 is when things got weird. The maze looked completely different now, almost 3-dimensional, and Polybius was really fast. Jenna's reflexes were still cat-like though, and she collected 6 sapphires quickly. But Jim was scrambling to keep away from the head. He tried juking this way and that, but he was simply no match. "Watch out!" Vinny screamed, but it was too late. Polybius caught Jim's green owl, and that's when everything went haywire. I have a daughter that got married. I love my son-in-law, but I wasn't ready for my daughter to get married. I knew at their wedding I was going to be drinking. I knew I was going to be drinking heavy, and I did not want to swing at anybody. I didn't want to cause a problem, but I was unsure. I took some Z-Biotics before, and I'm thinking about the next day. But they actually helped me at the moment, too. The confidence that I gained from knowing I was going to feel better the next day helped not only the wedding go better, but it helped my son-in-law live through the vows and through the whole process. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by a PhD scientist to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. It was Z-Biotics that made me feel better during the wedding and the next day. I kept hearing about pre-alcohol and wondered what it was actually like. Now that I've tried it, I believe the hype. And with their GMO technology, they will release different products that will help address toxic byproducts of modern living in the gut. Go to zbiotics.com/run to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use RUN at checkout. Z-Biotics is back with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/run and use the code RUN at checkout for 15% off. Polybius's head swelled until it nearly filled the screen. His eyes, which had been closed, opened wide. Except they weren't normal eyes. They were infinite spirals, massively deep, and they spun faster and faster. The machine also got louder. much louder, like an engine revving at full throttle. Vinny was worried the game might explode. Even worse, Jim looked entranced. His body had contorted and he was bent forward unnaturally, drawn towards Polybius' spinning eyes. Vinny grabbed his friend's shirt and tried to pull him away, but it was like Jim was held by chains. He couldn't move him at all. And then Vinny felt something. Just a gentle tingle at first, coming from the machine and going through Jim. It quickly got more and more powerful. Vinny had to back away or he'd be electrocuted. He saw electric current sweep over his friend's body and face. What happened next, Vinny would never forget. He watched his friend be hauled into the screen, like a voltaic hand was lifting Jim up and yanking him. Jim was suddenly just gone. Vinny approached Jenna, who had barely flinched this entire insane time. Her hands were still on the control board, like she couldn't let go. She was panting and sweating. He saw what she saw on the screen. Polybius, now with a full body, was dragging Jim into a digital cage. The game spoke. Player 2 captured. To add a new player, insert coin. Vinny took his coin out of his pocket and looked at Jenna. "Play, Vinny," she said. "Play." But he was too afraid. He didn't want to be the next to get sucked in. Vinny shook his head and slowly backed away. Jenna turned back to the game, but her unrivaled concentration wasn't there. Her eyes softened, and her hands lost their firm grip on the joystick. Vinny knew what was happening. She was giving up, losing on purpose, so the game would take her. She was going after Jim. Vinny turned back to the screen, where he saw Polybius capture Jenna's motionless dolphin character. "Play, Vinny," she repeated, and then Jenna too was taken into the game, and Vinny passed out. Vinny woke up to the sound of movement. He tried to open his eyes, but everything was blurry. As his pupils adjusted, he saw shoes. 2 pairs of black shoes, attached to 2 pairs of legs. Men in black suits. They were standing next to the Polybius arcade game and holding some sort of electronic device to it. Their faces were perfectly anodyne, their haircuts neat and identical, their movements sharp and practiced. Vinny was still weak and on the floor of autos and covered in dust. He saw no sign of his friends, but one of the men in black suits noticed Vinny. He walked slowly over, leaned down, and whispered in Vinny's ear, "Wake up." Want to hear what happens next? Tune in next week for part 2. Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Sean Raviv and produced by Abakar Adan and Lee Mengistu. Editing by Abakar Adan. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman, and artwork by Jessica Clogston-Kiner. Coordinating producer is Avery Siegel. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levitt. Executive producers at Will Media are Will Malnati and Rosie Guerin. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.